Today is the 6th of September 2014, and yesterday I watched a video about Edward Lidskalnin. It's a Latvian who did something very unusual, and until now people don't know how he did it. If you never heard about Edward Lidskalnin, look it up on Google. It's a guy who he died in the age of 64 in Florida. In 51. He was born in Latvia. At the age of 26, he was supposed to marry a girl, and this girl refused to marry him one day before the wedding. He was very disappointed. He left his country for Canada. He was working as a lumberjack. He never graduated more than four grades at school, and he got a cold and a lumberjack in cold winter in Canada, and he got tuberculosis. Finally ended up in Florida because it's warmer. It's not known from where he was earning his money. He never married. He was a sickly person, 1.5 meters tall, about 50 kilograms weight, very skinny, small and kind of weak. He bought a piece of land, a small piece of land, for money nobody knows from where, and this piece of land was beside a quarry of material from like the bottom of the ocean. He was cutting pieces of this material from the quarry, pieces of tons, 10 ton, and one piece of 30 tons. He worked at night alone, didn't hire anybody, and he managed to transfer these pieces and cut it and match it in such a way that they didn't need any mortar, into building a house for himself and some funny furniture outside and whatever. And he wrote a few little books where he did not describe how he did it, except that he managed, and he said to other people, because he arranged visits and was charging 10 cents for a visit, to show his castle inside. People are visiting, wondering, and when they asked him how he could, by himself, without any help of anybody else, with some primitive equipment, which some people think it was just a way to mislead other people, because he didn't do it with this equipment. He said that he knows how to control weight, and he knows how the Egyptian pyramids have been built. And that's all which is known about his invention. But somehow he managed to bring these huge pieces of stone from the quarry to his piece of land, And then when somebody wanted to build a multi-story building beside, he didn't like it. So he hired a truck without a driver and himself transferred all these pieces to another place in Florida, some 19 miles from there, where it can be observed until this day. I haven't been there because I didn't even know about it, and unlikely that I will ever see it. But the point is that a person that graduated 4 grades, even though he was reading voraciously, a lot of he was reading a lot because he was sickly, and even at school he spent very few. And he didn't renew his studies, not because he couldn't afford it, but he said it's too boring to study. Apparently, his level of intelligence was much higher than his peers at school. Anyway, the whole point is that he died, and nobody knows how he managed to, by himself, at night, because he didn't want people to see it, transfer 10 up to 30 tons of stone from one place to another. Even when he transferred the whole thing 19 miles from the original place, and he hired a truck, how he could load on a truck 30 tons? And it was a stone is a stone at about 30 tons, and still there you can witness it where it is now. I mean, a truck cannot carry 30 tons. A regular truck, a renter truck. And he somehow managed to do it. So it's quite obvious that he knew how to change the weight of things. And he explained it somehow with the magnets, this way, another way to. This is not the point. My point is that this guy made a tremendous discovery, and nobody knows it until now how it is done. And it would make the life of mankind much more easier and convenient if this discovery would be known. So, listening to this and watching this video, I came up with the idea that it's a pity if I do not share my discovery. It is not related to living weights and not related to physics and mathematics, even though I am an electrical engineer by education. It has to do with the workplace. We know now that we are officially in a recession, at a prolonged recession, and opinions of mass media says that we are just about out of it, and more serious people think that we are at the very beginning of it, and we are going in a very deep depression, which is not on one continent, but on the whole Western world. And as I am very active on LinkedIn, I read one of the, a while ago, I read one of the comments on LinkedIn. One guy who is working in a company that deals with risk assessment. I forgot the name of the company, but what hit me that he says that they discovered that there is a very significant incompatibility in the existing system. And this existing system in which we live right now, because of this incompatibility, is getting weaker and weaker. And if it will not be corrected the latest until 2050, the whole world will be overwhelmed by terrorism. It doesn't matter. It doesn't say which terrorism. It doesn't even hint what kind of incompatibility. But I am not aware of any incompatibility in our society that would be so significant, except the one which I discovered at the end of '69. And at the time when I discovered it, I was thinking that it's impossible that I am an electrical engineer would discover such a thing that has nothing to do with engineering. I discovered it after looking into this matter for 15 years before that, even before I graduated engineering. And I was so surprised that it came to me and not to a specialist in human relations that I decided that most likely it's a stupid idea of mine, or it is known and forgotten already by people that are in the profession of dealing with people, human relations. So I went for 2 years, evenings after work, to the Tel Aviv University and studied several subjects related to human relations, industrial relations, human relations, statistics, a few others. 4 times a week, a lecture every evening. And after that, my wife was so mad that I didn't register, I didn't get my degree there. It wasn't of interest to me. I only wanted to study what I want to study. And 2 years later, I could answer to my 2 questions. To the question that the idea is stupid, the answer was no, it is a great idea. To the question that this idea is known to people of this profession and forgotten already about it, the answer was no. It was never discovered and nobody paid even attention to it, even though it's just in front of everybody's eyes. So when I was already sure that this idea is great, I started to find a place to apply it. I offered to my boss, where I was department manager in a company where I was doing electrical work, and when I started to insist very strongly, he fired me. From there on, I worked on many jobs, and I was actually didn't follow any career in a general sense. I just was grabbing jobs that I could make some income. And it's a long story how I did it and everything, but eventually I found myself, I tried to organize a company that would be working according to the system, and in Israel and Carmel, and money I didn't have, so the government proposed the government needed to give jobs to newcomers, especially engineers from Russia that came in great quantities and didn't have any jobs. So I found 5 engineers that wanted to work according to my principle. Guys from Russia with everybody graduated automobiles and had at least two years of practical work in garages and fixing cars. And I was supposed to organize a company that would refurbish a truck within 5 days to the absolutely new condition, the same model, but the new condition. And that would be very lucrative if it would be done, and very necessary for Israel, because the due for trucks, at least at the time, was 100%. So we could, according to my calculation and the engineer that helped me out of this fight, that actually did the same thing in Russia, he, Leva Slavinsky, he is almost my neighbor now in Toronto, Canada. We made the calculation that we can do it in 5 days, one truck, 5 days of work, and the cost of it would be at most the cost of a new car in the United States, which would means 50% cost because of the 100% due. It didn't work out. The government didn't give me a penny of money, even though I found a place and found the in Carmel, the mayor of Carmel promised me a piece of land that is necessary for that. Anyway, it didn't work out, and my name in Israel was too notorious that I could find any engineering job. I was working part-time in a garage just to help my wife, because she was the only breadwinner at the time. And I decided actually to literally escape from Israel to Canada. I didn't even say to my partners, future potential partners, that I'm leaving, because I was ashamed that I couldn't get the money. So I got to Canada, and my first job was on assembly line of General Motors, where I confirmed that my idea would be great for General Motors. In fact, it was great for any company for profit. So what is actually my idea that I want to share with you? We live in a system which we like to call capitalism. Capitalism is the most, if not the only, just system, if not the only just social economic system in the world. And this system, according to this system, every successful investor of money and or labor, every successful investor is making a profit. So we are grateful to this system, this capitalist system, for all the good things that we have in life. Together with capitalism came industrial revolution, progress in technology, progress in science, in arts and literature and music and everything. Until now, we cannot create any piece of music better than the ones which were created in the 19th century and before. So it's all connected. But there is one thing that capitalism brought with itself. Together with capitalism, another very important step has been made, that slavery in some places and serfdom in other places depending on the place. In Europe it was serfdom, in the United States it was slavery, was replaced by employment. Employment is just as great a step in the mode of labor utilization, I call it, as the change from slavery to serfdom, from serfdom to employment. And there were some modes of labor utilization before that. But every new step of mode of labor utilization brought it with it a tremendous increase in general wealth. Slavery was a great progress because it allowed people to create pyramids, bridges, big roads, something that before slavery couldn't have been done. A family could not do that. Then slavery became uncomfortable for the slave masters, and they decided to give some freedom to their slaves, and became serfdom. At least the family of the serf was separated from the household of the slave master, and the productivity grew tremendously and was a new higher level of wealth both to the worker and to the landlord, the owner of the worker. The landlord was always the worker was the landlord was the owner of the worker in serfdom, just as in slavery the slave master was the owner of the worker, of the slave. But then when the employment came in together with capitalism, a new step forward in health and wealth of the society came in, and the productivity of the workers became higher significantly, and this is from where the wealth came in. And the problem was, and still is, that the employment mode of labor utilization is not a capitalist system. Despite the fact that capitalism brought it, is not a capitalist system. Why? Because in a capitalist system, as I already mentioned, every successful investor of money and or labor is making a profit on his investment of money and or labor. A worker is paid the market value of his labor. Many people discuss that it's not true, and I can discuss it too and prove that it is the market value of labor, but this is not the most important point. The most important point that the profit on labor, according to capitalism, is supposed to go to the laborer, to the worker, to the employee. And it is not. It is going to the owner of the enterprise. Initially, it worked well. Actually, it worked for about 200 years well. For a good reason, not one reason. One reason that the worker that came from the village without a penny, with a shirt on his back and nothing more than that, without a roof over his head, not being able to start a family because he didn't have a penny, he was extremely happy that an employer came in and invited him and gave him a job. Yes, he was working 10, 12, 14 hours 7 days a week. Yes, he didn't have any freedom, in fact, but in theory he had freedom, and he could theoretically leave his employer any time. So employers had to compete for the labor. And all of a sudden he could eat normally. He had a roof over his head. He could even marry and have a family. And the family was his. It didn't belong to anybody else. It's his family. So all this created a tremendous impulse to increase productivity, and this increased productivity raised our society in 200 years to the heights never known before. Now, with time, things changed. There is progress, and the means of production became more costly, or at least as costly, as labor. So originally, if the factory was a manufactory, which means made by hand everything, and the only means of production were raw materials and some old barn without any convenience, the means of production were a very small amount of the general expenses of the employer. If he would not make money on labor, he just wouldn't be able to survive. Especially that labor was very eager and devoted to the employer and trying to do his best. But gradually, 200 years later, which is about 100 years from now, before now, social conditions started improving. The means of production became more and more expensive because people, in order to work, were supposed to not just go to some barn, but to work in a building with plumbing, electricity, telephones. Advertising became very important because people didn't just buy whatever was produced, they got to promote it. There were different kind of production and all kind of sophistication. So on one side, the means of production became for the employer as expensive or more expensive than labor. And on the other hand, the workers themselves gained insurance, unemployment insurance, welfare, and losing a job, which before was tantamount to slow or maybe not even slow death from cold outside and from sicknesses and without a roof and everything, losing a job became a very inconvenient condition, but not deadly. And the worker started to understand that his labor has value in itself beside the workplace. Originally, the guy who was standing in a street corner waiting for somebody to hire him, he saw that unless somebody hires him, his time is worth nothing. Now an employee understands that first of all, his time is worth something, even though he is not employed. He can enjoy himself, he can take vacations, travel and all this on the money that he already made. And if he doesn't work, he will get for some time unemployment insurance. He will get finally welfare, which is an amount of money that people can somehow survive without danger to die from hunger. So the worker started to understand that his employer is actually a thief that pockets the profit on his labor, on the employee's labor, for himself, instead of, according to capitalism, that this profit will go to the pocket of the employee, of the worker. I am not sure, in fact, I'm sure that the majority of workers don't think in the same categories I'm thinking. Because I spent on this, before I even came up with it, 15 years of thinking, and it would be stupid on my part to think that everybody thinks the same way I do. However, the behavior, this is what's most important, the behavior of the worker at the workplace corresponds to his condition as if he does understand exactly what I'm saying right now, that he is exploited. Because exploitation, in my definition, as opposed to the definition of Karl Marx, is that the employer is pocketing the profit on the labor of his employee, while at the capitalist system, this profit on labor is supposed to go to the laborer, to the source, to the generator of this labor. Now, I can show these two things graphically and by a formula, and I will show it in the next video.